Who's some of the worst offenders that you've seen for colleges, at least?
Yeah. Well, Liberty University is up there. Sorry, guys.
Number one. Go Flames.
Yeah.
Training champions for Christ, number one in all things. So
I was
Has anybody told you how great our law school is, by the way?
Yeah. Oh gosh, your law school.
Hello and welcome to Growing Up Christian. I'm Casey, and I'm the only one here today. Sam and I had the toughest time this weekend getting this intro together, just technical difficulties and all sorts of things, and just came down to the wire. So I just wanted to take a quick minute to introduce our guest today. This is a great episode, and this is a especially timely one considering it's Pride Month and these guys are right in the middle of their big project. Our guest today is Paul Southwick, and Paul is the director of REAP, which is the Religious Exemption Accountability Project. If you may have heard of them lately because they're in the middle of a class action lawsuit against the Department of Education to try to put some pressure on colleges, especially religious colleges, that discriminate against gay, queer, trans, and non-binary students. We've talked at length on here about our experience at Liberty University, and guests like Luke Wilson, Matt Robbie, who, had to go through gay conversion therapy at Liberty. There was a lot of pressure on them. There's just years and years of bad practices here. And, we're talking about colleges where being gay is a punishable offense. And so the goal of REAP is to pressure the Department of Education to stop using government funds to support colleges that discriminate against our LGBTQ plus friends. So there's a lot of really interesting stuff that goes into this, because you might be thinking like, well, why the Department of Education? Why don't they just target the schools themselves? There's really good reasons for all of that. And Paul was just, he's a wealth of knowledge on the subject. He's kind of one of the ones leading the charge on this whole deal. And not only has he got, a ton of info that he shared with us about the basics of what this lawsuit is trying to do and some of the other projects that they're doing. REAP's doing, a documentary to back this up. They're doing a whole bunch of different public events and things like that. I mean, it's a multi-pronged approach to trying to protect these LGBTQ plus students. Not only that, but he's just a hilarious guy. I mean, just a really witty, fun person to talk to. And so I really think you're going to enjoy this conversation. This project, it's not something that's going to happen overnight. I mean, we're coming out of COVID. The courts are backed up. There's counter litigation and stuff that's been levied against REAP, to try to combat what they're doing with the Department of Education. There's a lot of pieces in play here. And this is something that is going to require a commitment from all of us that think this is important. Okay. So if this is something that speaks to you, which I think probably is a lot of you guys out there, if this is important to you and if you want to see this happen, I'm going to ask you to go to thereap.org, and that's going to give you the whole rundown on the project and stuff. But, towards the middle of the page on the right, there's a pledge button and a donate button. I would encourage you, if this is something that speaks to you, if protecting gay, queer, non-binary, and trans friends at religious colleges is something that you want to do, I would highly encourage you to financially support this project, because they're going to need it. I mean, they're in for a long, bitter fight with some of these institutions. So take a look at thereap.org. Enjoy our conversation with Paul Southwick. And Sam and I just wanted to say that, we've, over the past 6 months that we've been doing this podcast, we've gotten to talk to a lot of people from the LGBTQ community. And it's been just a really like, I don't know if educational is the right word. It's just been, we've learned so much, and not just about religion and how it's entangled in these issues and stuff like that, some of the hardships that they went through, but just about the value of people. If you're a member of the LGBTQ plus community and you listen to this podcast, Sam and I just want you to know that we really appreciate you guys. And, we want you to know that you guys make a difference every day on these issues just by being great people to the people around you. So without further ado, enjoy our conversation with Paul Southwick.
Hey, everybody, we're back with our guest, Paul Southwick. Paul's the director of the Religious Exemption Accountability Project. Generally seems to be abbreviated REAP, and that's what we'll go with for the conversation here. But first of all, Paul, thanks for joining us. We appreciate you doing this and taking the time here.
Really happy to be here. Thanks.
Yeah. Paul, can you tell us a little bit about REAP and what your role is with it before we kind of get into the meatier aspects of what's going on right now?
Sure. REAP's mission is to advocate for LGBTQ plus students at religiously affiliated colleges, universities, and schools where those spaces are hostile towards them. And not every religious space is like that, but unfortunately, there are quite a few. And so our work is primarily in the areas of litigation, documentary film, and research and policy work.
Okay. What's I don't know if there's anything specific. I feel like there's I don't know if you have anything specific up until this point, like documentary wise, I think is what I'm interested in a little bit too, is because I'd love to be able to point people in the direction of some of the work that you guys have had going on after this. So what kind of documentary work have you guys done?
Sure. Yeah, we have a team in mostly based in Los Angeles, a few folks here in Portland, and they started filming, I think it was in November of last year. It's been a little tricky with COVID and trying to film and travel places, but really the purpose of the film is to kind of uplift the personal narratives of a few of the students who are queer or trans, non-binary, and are on campuses like Baylor University, BYU, Liberty, and those kinds of places, Bob Jones University. And so it's going to follow them, their journey as students, but also get into their backstory, how they grew up, how they ended up at those schools, what it's like to be in that kind of a faith community as a person who's an outsider in some ways. And so it's following their lives and experience, and then also the litigation that we filed in March of this year, which would be a long-term case. It's going to follow some of that too.
Okay. Oh, that sounds great.
Kind of like personalizing some of these problems that tend to turn into like a big back and forth media blowout.
Yeah, because a lot of times, you'll have the right and the left, and it's this big clash, and people take sides, and they, go to their most comfortable place, and they kind of dig in. And what we're hoping is the people who kind of get caught in the middle of all that, which these, queer Christian kids do, that by sharing their story and personalizing it, it can kind of break down some of those walls that get put up real fast.
Yeah. I mean, personalizing it certainly makes a big difference. We've had a few conversations of late with people who had, come out at a later age that had difficult. It's like that no one in their life would have been supportive, which is why they took so long to come out. They were afraid that they wouldn't have that support. And of course, some didn't get it from everybody, but what you often see is that the people who are really close, like they're the ones who are more quickly to change their mind and redirect kind of like their belief system around that once it becomes a personal issue for them too.
Right. Yep. Or for their family members. So, often the parents will change their mind once their kid comes out, but that kid might be really scared to do that for quite some time.
Right. Yeah. Now you went to a Christian university, right?
I did.
Yeah. So you have a personal stake in this as well. There's some direct experience here.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I forget where are you guys from? What state?
So
LU is where we went to college.
Yeah. So yeah, I'm over in Massachusetts.
I'm in Kansas.
Okay.
But yeah, we met at Liberty University. So that's where so we're familiar with some of what you're doing. Not personally. I mean, we're both just your average straight white man. But what we didn't realize is how many of our friends were gay at Liberty.
Right.
We were the type of people you'd have to skewer in your documentary. We were awful. So I think that's what that's like the I think one of the more powerful things about like documentaries is just it was really easy to have awful views about the gay community and fill in the blank up to the point where like my latter years at Liberty, because I didn't know any gay people.
Yeah.
I had real strong opinions on them,
right?
But I didn't actually know any. And I remember like the first guy that I actually talked to a little bit that was gay was that, I don't remember his name, Sam, but he used to come to shows all the time. And I remember like after talking to him a little bit, like it was just really hard to maintain that, stark dividing line, this is how it is. And that's all there is to it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you guys know somewhat, what the kind of culture is like at a place like Liberty. It's similar to where I went to college out in Oregon, George Fox University. And, on a campus like that, it's not really that safe to come out. You can come out to some students, and maybe, students are a lot more affirming and supportive now than they were in the early 2000s when I was in college. And a lot of the faculty are also pretty on board. But when you know that if you come out to someone, they could tell your RA, and then your RA could tell the dean of, the honor code office or what have you, that's kind of, a scary place. Or for what happened to me, I was just so miserable and torn as a closeted queer person. I ended up having a panic attack about it, and I didn't know what that was or what was happening to my body. And afterwards, I had to meet with our campus pastor, and I told him why. It was all about this sexuality and feeling like I was this horrible, gross person. And unfortunately, instead of showing me love in a healthy way, he sent me to conversion therapy to get help. And he thought he was doing it out of love, but that's kind of the messed up thing about growing up in these fundamentalist communities, is that way of showing love is just so damaging, so harmful.
Yeah, that one's been sticking with me a lot lately. The amount of things that outside of that, even on a less maybe less personal level, is like I just remember thinking and hearing frequently like, oh, you got to speak the truth in love, but you do have to speak the truth. And it became clear as time went on that it was their understanding was mostly just that it's loving to tell the truth, and their understanding of what the truth was. But it seems particularly so when speaking to people who are queer that come out, and it's like, that's such a deep part of who they are, as opposed to like, I've been partying on the weekends and I'm in high school and oh, that wasn't me. I was the kid that was telling people to knock that shit off. But,
right.
But like when the response to that is like, we love you and we care about you, and that's why we have to do this, it almost like does a double down on the trauma.
Yeah, I think it's even more abusive when it's done like that, because then on the receiving end of that, you think, oh, well, I really should listen to them because, they have my best interest in mind. And so that earns your trust and your loyalty. And then you think that when it's not working out and you're not becoming straight, then you think, oh, it must be me. It's my fault. And it just adds more to the shame in the long run. So hopefully, folks are, even within these conservative religious circles, are starting to change their view on things like conversion therapy and just realizing that, yeah, that was a really bad idea.
So things
Yeah.
have pushed a long ways since like we were in college, like you were saying. Even still, like who's some of the worst offenders that you've seen for colleges at least?
Yeah. Well, Liberty University is up there. Sorry, guys.
Number one, go Flames!
Yeah.
Training champions for Christ, number one in all things. So
I was
Has anybody told you how great our law school is, by the way?
Yeah. Oh gosh, your law school, man, it's a dangerous place. I actually spent some time on the Liberty campus earlier this year because I did, as part of the REAP project, I drove my Tesla all the way across country for 2 months, going to little campuses and not so little campuses like Liberty and meeting with closeted queer students. So I've seen your campus and it is fancy. It is way fancier than most of these little Christian colleges out there in the middle of nowhere. But
Putting those federal grants to work.
yeah, lots of federal money coming in. But I met with one gay kid who was out, and he kind of fits your profile. Like he kind of looks like you. You know, he's pretty masculine, and you know, you wouldn't notice that he was gay just by meeting him. And his view is kind of like, oh, it's fine. You know, my friends know it's okay. But then if you talk to someone who's gender nonconforming or who doesn't look like one of the guys, they're still super scared to tell anybody or to come out at all. And so there's a real culture of fear. If you don't fit in, at least with some kind of the, you know, white middle class straight mold, if you don't look like that, it still is a really scary place. And I've also heard that there's this pastor there who has this program of conversion therapy. He just retired, but dozens, if not
Elmer.
What's that?
Elmer.
Yeah.
No, what's the guy's name? Luke talked about him.
Yes. I forget his name now, but a lot of people went through that guy's program, so pretty bad. But LU's not alone. Their Bob Jones University is really, really hard place. Cedarville University in Ohio. You know, if you just come out at some of those places, you'll be given 24 hours or less to pack your bags, and you're out.
No way.
Yes.
They don't. Wow.
Cedarville. I haven't heard that name in a while.
Yeah, it is.
That was like
rough.
That was like the spot where a lot of your buddies in youth group that had bad grades went. I'm sure it's a great place. Just saying that I noticed a trend.
Oh man, yeah. So there are some schools like that still exist. You know, Liberty probably wouldn't do something that drastic just for coming out, but if you start holding hands with a same-sex partner on campus, then they probably will.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right from when I was there. Now, a lot of these colleges seem to set up these programs as a place to go after you come out, but I thought it was required at Liberty at one point, and I turns out I was wrong on that. It was just strongly encouraged, and you were pretty shamed into not doing it. But so it seems like as long as you weren't having any physical intimacy, regardless of how light that might have been, like you said, just holding hands, it would have flown under the radar. They would have allowed you to be there, but they were definitely keeping a close eye on you. And if they thought that there was an issue, they'd push it a little bit more to go to their therapy program, their gay conversion therapy. So when you looked at all these other colleges, would you find them mostly similar to that? Or are there a lot of them that are like more like Cedarville, where it's just like, if you refuse to go to those, like they might have these programs available, but if you refuse, they kick you out, or are they always optional? Or frequently optional?
Every school is different, right? And it depends on who the dean is or the president at the time, how strict they're going to be about it. But, you know, for the 200 or some odd colleges that are out there doing some version of this, There's some, there's ones on the really bad side, like Bob Jones, Cedarville, and Liberty. And then there's other ones that are on like the discrimination light side, and that would be like Baylor University. Because everyone, when you think of Baylor, you never think, or, most people don't think of queer oppression. They think of basketball, and they think of medical school and like really smart people going there. So they've created this brand and this image, but even at Baylor, they don't let LGBT students have a student group. They prohibit same-sex relationships for faculty and students. So, I mean, it's not as bad in that they wouldn't really send people to conversion therapy, and they won't really expel students, probably not even expel them for holding hands, but it's still prohibited. And it's kind of like this hush hush kind of a thing.
Yeah, that's so strange. Because even are there even some college? I don't really know where Baylor stands. I know some people who went there, but are there colleges that even have like this? Like they appear to be liberal Christian in some ways, but still have this going on, or is there kind of a divide between a more conservative ideology in this, and then just your like a liberal Christian college? I know that's a spectrum, so it's hard to like really balance. I don't know if you have any just thoughts on that.
Well, in like the way I grew up, pretty much anyone that was not Liberty or Bob Jones was liberal. So, it's like, it depends on how you grew up, what you think of as liberal versus conservative. But I would say at a lot of the schools, more on the liberal side, like Baylor, or there are a bunch out there like Seattle Pacific University, Eastern University, especially if they're in like big cities where, a lot of people tend to be more cultured or progressive or what have you. I have met gay people. Those schools, they look really inviting. Even Liberty looks really inviting. If you look at marketing materials, you're like, whoa, everybody goes here. Half the students must be black or brown. And like, it's like if you just go based on that, they say diversity, right? They use the word diversity and inclusion. And they don't specify, that they are very limited in their understanding of what that means. So yeah, a lot of the kids will tell me that, I knew it was conservative, but, I met people, they seemed really open and welcoming. Their marketing materials were great. And I didn't realize that it was going to be as bad as it was. I mean,
so I think like, for a lot of my like more conservative friends, especially those that are still like in the church, I think they would hear a lot of this stuff and be like, well, look, it's a private institution, and if you don't like the rules, then you can choose not to go there. So like, why do you have to change the way that things are there when that's obviously what people believe?
Right. Number one question we get from everybody. And surprisingly, that same question comes from the civil rights groups that are fighting for LGBT rights. They ask us the same thing. Why should we get involved in your issue? They shouldn't even be there to begin with. And the real response to that is, sorry, everyone, you're always going to have queer people ending up in your spaces. And you're always going to have trans people ending up in your spaces. And why is that? Well, because sexual orientation and gender identity is not something unique to secular people. Like fundamentalist Christians have gay kids too. They have just as many gay kids as a secular person who's never stepped a foot in church in their entire life. The percentage of gay kids is going to be the same. The percentage of trans kids is going to be the same. And if you grew up in a home like mine, the only college you would ever go to would be a conservative Christian college. There was no other world available to you. And you didn't want to go anywhere else, unless you were one of the bad kids. But, if you're one of the good kids, you're going to the Christian school and you don't like gay people. And then you get there, and if you realize that you are gay yourself, you're in hell. You're in literal hell. There's nowhere to go, no one to turn to, nobody who has your back. And it's a very, very scary place. So that's one response. But another response is, these are not really private schools. You hinted at this earlier, Casey. Liberty University takes in $1 billion with a B from the federal government every year. That's one school.
Wow.
$1 billion. And so we're talking about the federal government is effectively financing all of these Christian colleges. So we're not targeting any Christian college that is what I would say truly private. If you're just funded off of, your church or your denomination or parents paying down the money for the school and the federal government is not involved in financing your school, our case has nothing to do with you. There are a few schools out there like that. But when taxpayer money is on the line, that means I'm supporting it, you guys are supporting it, and anyone who pays taxes is supporting it. And that's where it really shouldn't be allowed.
Do you call that the Hobby Lobby defense?
Their version of it? Well...
Just, I don't want my tax dollars going towards condoms.
Right. But Viagra's okay, no
Yeah. So that's what this, I don't think we've gotten into it on a specific level yet. So addressing that and what REAP is doing is you guys are basically spearheading a class action lawsuit against the Department of Education to eliminate these fundings, like this type of funding to religious institutions or academic institutions that are anti-LGBTQ and have programs like the gay conversion therapy programs or are in some way actively discriminated against them. Is that right?
It's almost right. So
okay.
Our goal is not to take the money away. Our goal is to align the financial incentive with providing protections and basic civil rights to queer people on these campuses. So what I mean by that is, if we win our lawsuit, the schools are not going to be forced to change their policy. What they're going to be forced to do is decide, do they still want those millions and billions from Uncle Sam? And if they do, then they need to start following the law. But if they would rather keep on discriminating, they can do that. They just can no longer take public money. So if that's the position that we want them to be put in, because right now, why should they change? Why should they change? They get all the money from the government. The parents of these fundamentalist kids are super happy that they're still being oppressive to queer people. So everyone with money and power is happy right now. So why would they ever change? You have to change the financial incentive. And so that's what we're doing. And that's why we're going after the Department of Education, because they have obligations under the Constitution to protecting the basic civil rights of all people, including LGBTQ people. And they have the power of the purse string to influence what the policies are going to end up being like at these schools.
Yeah, I've never in my life seen anyone sacrifice their values for money. So we'll see how that plays out.
Well, I can tell you how it's playing out in Canada, because Canada's like doing, Canada's always great for a lot of things, right? But there was a conservative Christian college there that was going to open a law school, and they weren't going to let queer people who were married go to that law school, and they had the same kind of sex policies like at Liberty. And they went to get it approved by the government. The government said, we're not approving it because you're not allowing your law school to be open to all people. And it went all the way to the Canadian Supreme Court. And the Canadian Supreme Court sided with the government and said, look, we're not going to accredit a school if you don't let all people attend. And all people includes gay people. And so in response, the school immediately changed its policy and it went ahead and opened the law school. And now everybody's fine. Everyone's fine. They still have their law school, but now everybody gets to go. So I think, if I had to predict, I'd say most of the schools are going to keep the money and change their policies. Some won't.
So, okay. Can you break down the number a little bit for me? Because it's like you said, Liberty takes takes in $1 billion federal dollars a year. I'm sure that takes a lot of different forms. Does that number include just like federal student loans like Fannie Mae and maybe that's not even the one that does it. I can't remember which one of those the loan lady, you know.
The number includes student loans, but only the ones that come from the Department of Education. So not private loans from any banks or financial institutions. But yes, it includes student loans. It includes Pell Grants. And it also includes probably the next biggest chunk of that money would be direct payments for grants to the school or contracts. So like Liberty has a contract with what military unit is over by Liberty? Is it the Air Force or the Navy?
There's a Air Force base in I think it's is it in Virginia Beach or something like that?
Okay.
Or Navy?
Yeah, one of the branches,
Navy base.
It's either the Navy or the Air Force, I think. But one of those branches, Liberty has a contract with them, and they get paid by the Department of Defense for whatever they're doing. I don't know what the agreement is exactly, but they have that kind of a contract, so they get paid by the government for that. Also, a lot of science researchers. I don't know so much at Liberty, but I know at like BYU and Baylor and some of the big research schools, the Department of Health and Human Services and the National Science Foundation, they'll award multi-million-dollar grants to do research or to run programs. So that's the other way the money comes in.
Okay, so does that mean when you're saying that this also affects student loans, like the government issued student loans, does that mean that maybe I probably have a misunderstanding of how any of this works, because when I went to college, my parents dealt with it, and then I just paid them off at that point from now until the rest of my life. But you take out these. Does the colleges get money to kind of divvy out these loans on their behalf, or is it going to affect kids applying for these loans from the government if that's the institution they choose to go to? Am I making sense when I ask that question?
Yeah. So
no.
You lost Casey.
I'll catch up. Go ahead.
Well, I'll try to break it down a little bit. So there are two forms of money coming in. One is the direct money, and that is like the federal government just putting money in the bank account of Liberty University for whatever, for buying something from them or investing in some research. Then there's what's called indirect financial assistance, and that would be the student loans. It's considered indirect. Now, indirect financial assistance still means government money, and it means that you have to follow all the government's rules if you qualify for it. So even though it's indirect. Now, what I mean by indirect, what I mean is when you get like $20,000 from the U.S. Department of Education to go to Liberty University to pay your tuition, it never goes into your bank account. It always goes directly into Liberty's bank account. So it flows through you like in some ephemeral way, but you'll never see a dime of it. It's automatically going. The money that you would see is if you're getting loans to cover books or living expenses, then you will be given, the smaller amount for whatever that is. So how this would work?
You get that refund, and you should. If you were mature at all, you would send that refund back and just say, take this off my final tally. But no one does. And they're like, I want a PlayStation. I want some Jordans. And then they get to pay for those for 30 years.
Yeah. Not that any of us ever did any of that.
This is the voice of experience talking.
So to your point, Sam, some people say that if we're successful, we're going to be limiting the options for students. And, their argument is that, look, now, a student who wants to go to Liberty and wants to pay for it with government loans, they won't be able to do that. And so in one respect, it's true. if Liberty decides, if we're successful and Liberty says, we're not going to comply and we're not going to treat gay people equally, then they won't get to participate in those loan programs and students will not get access to the loans and they'll have to go to a different school. So that is true. But the burden on that they're trying to make us, I guess, look like the bad guy for that. But really, it's their decision. They can decide to do the right thing or not, the school itself. And, hopefully a lot of them will. And I think most of them will because they're going to want the money.
Yeah.
But, there could be a situation where some students will not be able to go to Cedarville University, for example. If Cedarville says they don't want to change, then those students won't get access to government money. And there are already schools like that because if you take government money, you also have to comply with sexual assault rules. You have to apply with sports equity rules. It's not just gay stuff. It's also a whole bunch of other stuff. So some schools choose that. Now, you could also think of the same situation, though, if it was like Black students not being allowed to go to these schools, like Bob Jones University in the 1980s. And you could also kind of put the blame on Black students. Why would you want to go to an all-white school? You're making it harder for the white kids to afford it by demanding civil rights protections. And it's really putting the burden on the wrong person.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. And you could definitely see the way schools would respond to that, I think, fairly quickly. And the ones that didn't, it was like, you obviously a personal stake in this. I want to get into it a little bit later, but all of the plaintiffs in the case have a personal stake in this. And they all went to these schools thinking that they wanted to, without understanding the impact it was going to have on their life for years to come. And it, in some ways, saying also that if you really desperately want to go to a Christian school, there are plenty that will still take your money. And it hopefully will. And I believe this is probably the perspective you're coming from, given the way I'm understanding what you're saying, is that it'll protect a lot of people who might think that that's what they want based on the upbringing they had, without understanding or realizing that it's going to be a very damaging choice in the long run.
Yep.
But so this will, though, like, make it you could be I'm trying to think. There was several like little bitty Christian schools around us that had small student bodies and stuff like that. But this would kind of effectively make it impossible to be a Liberty that has 10,000 people on campus. Because that's what I was curious about. I just Googled the number of, or the amount of federal loans that are, or student loans that are federally backed, and it's 92%. So I mean, you're not going to have a 10,000 person campus with no access to federal student loans,
unless you're BYU. Like BYU,
Mormons are good at this sort of thing.
They have so much money that they don't need the government's money. But yeah, to be fair, or maybe another way of looking at it, Casey, is Liberty ballooned off of the back of government money. Liberty did not used to have 100,000 students with 10,000 on its campus. Liberty started as a small institution, and then they chose to take government money and they went big. And now they have put themselves in that situation. So again, it's like, all right, Liberty, you don't want to do this. Well, you kind of already made your bed by taking government funding. You already have to comply with so many different legal restrictions. And yeah, you're going to try to religious liberty your way out of as many as you can. But at a certain point, when you're hurting people, the government's going to come down and say, you can't do that anymore with our money, and you're going to have to change. And
Liberty has become the Goldman Sachs of Christian colleges. They're too big to fail. We have to prop them up.
Yeah.
And I do think that you are, your points are valid, but you are kind of selling short the stalwart leadership of Jerry Falwell Jr. Fair's fair.
I'm glad he has one defender in this audience. Oh Oh man, that guy! I have had dreams about Jerry Falwell just because he's like always in the news about doing something stupid and horrible.
Yeah, imagine having to apply for jobs or get a job with that school on your resume.
Yeah, no, that's a common thing we hear from a lot of folks that, it's like, wow, when people are full of hypocrisy like Jerry Falwell, or they're out doing really mean things to people, that their school gets a bad rap and they kind of become ashamed of that.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of people, I want to get into some of how something like this class action lawsuit started, because obviously it just starts with an idea. It starts with recognizing the issue. I feel like most people are really familiar with the concept of a class action lawsuit and the way that they get they get a letter in the mail that says they can get a check for like $3.47 if they bought a crock pot in 1984.
Right.
That might have caught fire if you left it on for 72 hours straight or something ridiculous. But like,
you or a family member has mesothelioma.
Yeah. So I guess I don't feel like I mean, that's my understanding of class action lawsuits. Everyone gets it, but they're kind of vague. So like when you have this idea and you have this big thing that you want to tackle, like what does that look like? How does starting a class action lawsuit like this work?
Yeah, good question, Sam. So yeah, you're totally right. It's usually about the crock pot. I mean, that's what people are most familiar with. But it's also frequently used in civil rights cases. And so the court offers class action as it's essentially an efficient way to bring a whole bunch of legal claims. So imagine, let's say that we have 10,000 students who would like to file a lawsuit against the Department of Education because they are queer and they got harmed at a Christian college. Well, they could all file 10,000 lawsuits all over the country, and then that would be a lot of work for the judges and for the juries and the courts. So what the legal system in the US allows is, well, let's just consolidate it all. And you can have what are called representative plaintiffs. And so for our case, we have 33 representative plaintiffs, and they stand in the shoes of all the queer and trans and non-binary students at religious colleges who are being harmed. And so if they're successful, then everyone wins. And that's kind of the doctrine of a class action is, you can, it's like judicial economy is kind of what's driving it there.
Let me put it in better terms for you. If you remember Dragon Ball Z, class action lawsuit is the spirit bomb of the legal world.
Okay. I wasn't a Dragon Ball Z guy, but
I'm going to take your word for it.
Yeah. Oh, man. I felt so good about that reference and it missed both of you.
Are you a gamer? I think I can tell by your chair in your.
My wife is. My wife's
a gaming
gamer.
Chair. Okay.
Performance based.
Yeah, you're right. In a way.
Does that mean when you have this idea for the class action lawsuit? So maybe REAP has this idea that says we should do this. This is a big problem. Does it start with going to the court and then getting a bunch of people to sign on to it? Or does it start with collecting, do you have to get signatures and get support before you even bring it to a court?
Yeah. So I've been a lawyer for a little over a decade. And over the last 10 years, I've represented a lot of queer and trans students in one-on-one cases. So one kid gets expelled in Oklahoma, and somehow they find me because I've done one of these cases before, and then I represent them there. And then another kid gets expelled from Nebraska. So those are one-on-one plaintiff cases. Well, what I noticed is over time, those one-on-one scenarios are actually becoming more frequent, not less frequent, even though civil rights have expanded greatly over the last 5 or 10 years, just like at this lightning speed for LGBTQ people. The campuses we're talking about, it's basically like nothing has changed since 1950, So these kids are like going to high school often in public schools where like half the kids are gay now, And then their parents ship them off to Liberty, and then whoa, they have to go back in the closet, and they're not so keen on doing it anymore. And now when they come out at a place like Liberty University and they get sent to the dean of women or the dean of men or council, they're like, screw this. I don't want to do that. And then they reach out to people like me. And so I've seen it's like getting more and more of a problem. So that's why I decided, instead of doing all these one-on-one legal battles, this thing really needs to be attacked systemically, because it's a systemic issue. But I wanted to make sure. And so I traveled around the country, like I mentioned, and I met with dozens of queer and trans students all over the country, all sorts of different colleges. And then we also commissioned a study. And so we had a study of 3,000 Christian college kids from 100 and something different institutions were represented in the sample. And the study revealed that 12% of them identified as LGBTQ, and 20-something% identified as LGBTQ or having some kind of interest or attraction or leaning towards the same sex. So that told us that it's not just one or two kids. We're talking about tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of kids, when you think of how many students are enrolled at schools. If you just think of Liberty, there's 100,000 right there. BYU, another 100,000 right there. Then you add up the other 200 small and mid-sized ones, you're talking about, over 1 million students at these schools.
Is like with the individual cases, I mean, do these kids have a good track record of being able to come back at the institution, or is it really dependent on the state?
Yeah, so I can't talk about any specific cases because of confidentiality and attorney-client privilege. But what I can tell you a few things. It's a lot harder for these kids to get protections when they're going to a school in the South. Because in the South, there is still a culture that often, outside of urban areas like Nashville or Dallas, there's often still a culture that's quite a secular culture that's quite hostile to the queer kids. So if you're in like rural Arkansas and you're a Christian college and you just flat out expel a trans kid just because they're trans, your neighbors in Arkansas might be like totally fine with that. But if you do that in Seattle, your neighbors are not fine with that. The employers who are hiring your graduates at Microsoft and Starbucks and Amazon, they are not going to be happy with that. So kids have more power in urban and coastal environments where the community and the employers are progressive enough that the schools do not want to be embarrassed or shamed by what they have done. So what does that mean? Are they being nicer? No, not really, but they're being quiet about it. And when it happens, sometimes they're willing to settle under the table to avoid bad publicity. But what that means is that a lot of stories don't get told because they are shielded by non-disclosure agreements. So I would say that, that tells you a few things about like whether the kids can get justice or not and what the justice looks like right now.
That's really interesting. We know none of those schools is Liberty University because they are immune to the feeling of shame at this point. So it can't be shame that's keeping them from doing anything. So when you're building this, what's the process by which you pick plaintiffs? Were these people you knew and had experience with? How does that process work? And then what is the role of a plaintiff in the situation here?
So I started with Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, starting on social, because what I'd do is I'd read about it in the news. So-and-so expelled, so-and-so denied admission. And then I'd find them and I'd say, hey, I read about you. I'm putting together this thing. Are you interested in this thing? And then they would say almost always, yes. And then I would say, do you have any friends who've gone through this? And then they would usually say yes. And they would introduce me to their friends. So Luke, you mentioned Luke Wilson, who I think has been on here.
Yep.
Like, he knows every queer person in the history of Liberty University ever. So
he does.
And he also knows a lot of people from other conservative colleges. So he connected me with quite a few people, and folks like him. And then I also just get contacted by people because I've done enough of these one-on-one individual cases that have gone into the news that people do reach out. And then when we started REAP, we launched the organization and we filed the lawsuit. Since then, probably another 100 students have come to us out of the woodwork saying, "Me too, this happened to me too." And so now it's just kind of spreading like wildfire. But it starts with that initial handful that I kind of tracked down through social media and that agreed to be. It's, kind of started with 5 and then it became 10. And then I was like, oh, maybe let's get, 20. And then it was 40. And then, so it's really growing.
Wow. So is there not a limit to the amount of plaintiffs you can have? Is that just like at your discretion? You just keep going until they get tired and you win?
So there's not necessarily a strict limit, but the idea behind a class action is that, you don't have everyone who could be a plaintiff as a plaintiff. And so you asked me earlier, like, how do I decide who should be plaintiff? And so I should tell you that not everyone that I spoke with or interviewed did I ask to be a plaintiff. And that's because to be a plaintiff, you need to have a few things. Not only do you need to be part of the LGBT community and go to one of these schools, but you also need to be healthy enough to go through something like this. And what I mean by that is a lot of like 19-year-olds who are closeted and queer at a tiny school, like their mental health is not the best, right? And putting them through the ringer and the spotlight is not a good idea. So I wanted to vet them and make sure that I felt like they are, mentally stable. They have a friend group who knows that they're out and will support them, that they have family members that will be there, making sure that they are grounded enough that this isn't going to ruin their life, basically. So did some of that, and then also want to make sure, on the other hand, that everyone's telling the truth and not making shit up to, go on some crusade. So that was part of why I met with people face to face, even during a pandemic with social distance, to make sure they're real and that their stories are legit.
Well, it's a long vetting process when you start with MySpace surveys. So, like, for someone that gets on board with this, that gets selected as a plaintiff, like, what is their role going forward? Are they going to be a part of the legal action that happens? I mean, do they have to be present when you guys are in court and stuff like that, or is it more of available for questions and testimony and all that kind of stuff at any given time?
So they all have to be willing to share their story, which they've done, and they've become ambassadors for the case and for REAP itself. They are part of the documentary, which will be covering, some of them specifically more in depth, but all of them to a certain extent through the case. In terms of the mechanics of a lawsuit, it's a little different now because of COVID. The courts will probably start opening back up in person here pretty soon, but there's a giant backlog in the legal system because of COVID. So things move really slowly. And nowadays, and especially post-pandemic, I think that when we have like big hearings or depositions, I think everyone's probably still going to just do them virtually now because it's cheaper not to have to fly everyone somewhere and put them up in a hotel and just for an hour-long hearing with a judge or for, a half-day deposition. But Yeah, some of them will be providing testimony in hearings, and if we go to trial, at a trial, and there'll be a trial in front of a jury, they could all be deposed. I don't think the government or the interveners are going to want to depose everybody, but they all could be, and some of them will be deposed. So they are putting themselves out there, and they know that they're taking on a risk of losing some of their privacy.
So is there like a I imagine with cases like class action cases like this, especially if it's high profile and on such a tense issue to begin with, like there's got to be some active like PR discussion going on with plaintiffs, right? Like what happens when you get like let's say you got a person, there's media attention, they're kind of a Sarah Palin type character, and they go rogue and they start wandering off script. You know, like how do you handle that? Is that common, or is that just like that's why you have such an extensive vetting process before you get into it? You got to pick the right person for it.
It's a little bit of that, but there's also, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so we were really intentional early on in arranging for media training. There's an organization called GLAAD, which does a lot of work in the LGBT media and entertainment industry space. And they have someone that offered to train all of our plaintiffs on media. So they've all been through a media training. And then we have a publicist who helps with interviews and making sure we're picking the right plaintiffs to speak to the right media outlets. So we have a publicist working with us, and then we have a social media team, and our social media team is in charge of both doing our social media for REAP, which you can find us on Instagram and Facebook, by the way. But they also are kind of, just checking in on what the plaintiffs are posting on their own social accounts to make sure that messaging is aligned. And so far, so good. The kids are, they're smart. They're smart kids. They know what they're doing, and they've gone through the training, and they're doing a really good job. And it's reaching a wider audience through their social networks.
Yes. There was recently I don't know if I have the language right, but the class action lawsuit's been challenged by a group called the Alliance Defending Freedom. I don't know what it looks like to like challenge a lawsuit, like a class action lawsuit, or what they're even going for. Is that like something that you now have to deal with? What does that even look like when another group comes out and challenges a class action lawsuit, and what are they doing?
Sam, you've been paying attention and you've done your homework. Very good. So Alliance,
somebody has to. Casey just sits there and makes jokes like a ding dong.
Plays video games with his wife all day, huh? So yes, we have had. So right now the lawsuit is structured as you have plaintiffs on one side and you have defendants on the other side. So our kids, our students are the plaintiffs, and the defendants are the Department of Education. So where are these other people coming from? Well, the Christian colleges who are doing the discriminating, we didn't sue them because, like I said earlier, we're not forcing them to change their policy. We're saying you can make a decision. You can keep your policies or not. We're targeting the funding stream and non-discrimination law. So we don't have to name any of the colleges because the relief we're asking for is just against the government. But the colleges are thinking to themselves, well, we don't ever want to be put in that situation where we have to decide between money and our convictions. And so we want to intervene. And they're also saying that they don't believe that President Biden is going to defend the religious exemption and their interests. So the law offers a procedure where you can file a motion and say, I would like to intervene in this case because I think my rights are at stake and no one in this lawsuit is looking out for them. So we're coming in. So Alliance Defending Freedom did that, and they are a very right-wing organization that's been, the Southern Poverty Law Center has designated them as a hate group. They put out all sorts of very extreme materials, but they have lots of money and lots of very smart lawyers. I can say that in part because I guess I'm uh, outing myself a little bit here, but I was at Alliance Defending Freedom back in my conservative, self-hating days when I was a law student. They have a fellowship called the Blackstone Legal Fellowship, and I was one of those legal fellows. And so I spent time in the belly of the beast, and I know their operation, and they are not to be treated lightly. So they have come in, and then the Council for Christian Colleges and Universities just called me yesterday, and they intervened last night. They filed motion to intervene on behalf of 180 Christian colleges. So there are now multiple interveners, all raising First Amendment arguments.
Ooh, wow. It sounds like that sounds like it's going to be this. You mentioned this is going to be it's a long road, but now I'm kind of getting an idea of what makes it so long.
Yeah. And so
it's like if you hit speed bumps going fast enough, you barely feel them though, you know?
Yeah. So we're going to, we're in communication with a broader coalition beyond REAP. And, our hope is to, they're bringing muscle. We're going to bring more muscle too.
So obviously, I don't know anything about the law or how that all functions, but it sounds like, the strategic approach you guys are taking is significant, because when you're going after the Department of Education and funding schools that perform certain actions against a group of people versus the schools themselves, that certainly gives you guys a lot more leverage than trying to just go after schools and make them change policy, things like that. Now, even though I've tried to do my homework, there are certain things that I haven't really done a great job at, paying attention to, but outside of like a general, just generality, being whatever in a general sense. But one of the things that it seems like, I know there's been a lot of talk about making updates to the Equality Act, and nothing's really happened with that yet. It's gone seems like it's kind of just waiting to be heard. But then the other thing is that there was that Supreme Court ruling. I'm going to get the name wrong. It's like Bostock versus Clayton County, Georgia. Is that right?
Bostock.
And okay. So my understanding is that's significant. That Supreme Court ruling is significant in kind of paving the road for what you guys are doing. Is that something you could speak to?
Are you sure you're not in law school right now?
Yeah.
Citing Supreme Court decisions and precedent. Yeah. So the Bostock decision was extremely helpful for our case. It really was a piece of the puzzle that we don't have to fight anymore. And Bostock said that Title VII, which prohibits sex discrimination in employment, includes sexual orientation and gender identity as a matter of law, not subject to interpretation. And Title VII on employment is interpreted pretty much the same way by the courts, and they say this even, as Title IX, which is our case is based on Title IX, which also prohibits sex discrimination, but in education. And so those two statutes are interpreted the same. So pretty much the universal understanding is now that Bostock said sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity under Title VII in the employment context, they almost certainly would do the same thing for Title IX, and all the judges are going to do that. So that was really, really helpful, but the case doesn't say anything about religious exemptions.
Yeah, you kind of just have to hope that they draw from it being a closely related concept, and depending on I don't know how that works really on your end, and trying to make that connection and make the case that it's the same, or it should be the same. It seems reasonable to the people you're talking to right now, but
yep. So on the Equality Act side, they people are saying, well, why do we need the Equality Act then? Because the Supreme Court, haven't they already decided the issue? And, there's some merit to that to a certain extent. But the Equality Act would cover a lot more ground than the Bostock decision would do. And it would cement protections that were beyond the whims of any particular court or administration. So it's still a very important piece of legislation, really vital to try to get that passed, though in the current Senate, it's unlikely to overcome hurdles with the Republicans because of the filibuster.
Yeah.
Now, like, obviously, as this goes on and it gets more public awareness and stuff, especially from people on the opposing side, it's going to be painted as, you're forcing religions to violate their conscience and to change their doctrine and all of this stuff. And like, from like a practical standpoint, for a school like Liberty, what sort of changes would they have to make in your mind if this went through the way that you want to see it go through? Like, what sort of practical changes does that mean for them on the ground on a daily basis?
Really good question. It wouldn't fundamentally alter the identity of Liberty University as a religious or Christian school, evangelical school. The school could even continue to maintain beliefs about marriage and gender identity that they currently espouse. It's not going to change their beliefs. They can still claim to believe what they want. But what it will change is it means if a transgender student, let's say a male transgender student, enrolls at Liberty, that they can't be put in female housing. They should be put in male housing because they are transgender male. If straight people like yourselves are allowed to get married while they're students, then gay people should be allowed to get married too to their same-sex partner and not be expelled. If we win, Liberty can still prohibit premarital sex. I'm sure you guys know that is, followed by all students very, very carefully. But
well, at least two.
Yeah.
But they can still regulate sexual conduct, but they just need to do it on an equal footing. So, like, if you guys were allowed to make out with your girlfriends, let's say, or let's not even say make out, but you're allowed to.
You weren't.
We weren't.
If you were allowed to be in a room alone with your girl, no, couldn't do that either. Okay.
What about holding her hand?
It's like
money
in the quad.
Yes.
Could you hold hands? I can't remember. Or you had to be engaged or something, didn't you?
I don't remember. I don't know if you could. I feel like you could. You could sneak in a handhold or two probably before getting expelled.
Dude, and this is a broader conversation. I want to distract us right now, but I want to lobby for the rights of all students to dry hump in their vehicles at Walmart. That should not be exclusive to any one group. You know what I mean?
I think we need to file a class action lawsuit against Walmart for all the times they called the cops on people who were doing that. I mean, it was the only 24-hour location. I mean, what were we supposed to do?
Yeah, I know the legal system's backed up right now, but can you pencil us in underneath?
I'm not sure if you're going to survive my vetting process, to be honest.
But so like, practically speaking, they have to drop the punishments for that relate to gender identity, sexuality, stuff like that. Like, identifying as a gay person can no longer be a punishable offense.
Right. Exactly. They need to treat gay students according to the same rules that they treat straight students, cisgender students, and need to be treated in terms of gender identity. Trans students would need to be treated the same way as well. So yeah, it's changing the rules to make sure that there's equality, but they can still maintain whatever belief systems that they want, and it wouldn't change like what religious leaders could say. It would not allow the conversion therapy program to go forward, though, either.
They're going to have these types of institutions they'll have to build almost twice as many dorms, because they don't often allow you to be in the same room alone as the person you're. So just to be safe, just to make sure everyone gets their own room.
Everyone gets a private
We don't
room.
want any funny business going on.
Yeah, they might have an all gay dorm, and I have a feeling it's not going to be the nicest dorm they built. You get in the old circle dorms.
It's kind of funny. You guys should be jealous because, you had to room with dudes who you were not into, but kind of a dirty little secret is that the gays and lesbians at Liberty are really kind of happy with the sex separation because they can covertly get away with a lot more than you guys could have.
We've heard some tales.
Yeah, I know. We've been hearing them more recently. It's been funny to be like, that happened on my dorm while I was there. I missed a lot. But granted, my roommates were identical. We're basically adults. My roommates were identical twins that dressed the same every day. And to be honest, I'm not convinced that they weren't in a relationship.
Dude, you have no idea how strange these two were. It's like people don't believe the stories that Sam tells about it, but they are true. One would get up early. They didn't have the same classes every day. So like whoever got up first would lay out the outfit for the other.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was
bizarre.
A rough year.
Wow.
He spent a lot of time in other people's rooms.
Yeah.
I was a hall wanderer till all hours of the night until I just had to go to sleep. Oh my God. All right. Paul, I want to be respectful of your time here, but if you have anything else, any that you want to just mention, stuff that we didn't touch on that you feel is important to get across as you're trying to build awareness for this, just want to give you an opportunity to say anything else that we might have missed here that you'd like to get out there.
Sure. Well, if you want to learn more about us, you can visit our website, which is www.thereap.org. And you can learn a little bit more about the lawsuit. You can see who all the plaintiffs are. We've got photos up there of all of them. And you click on the photo, it gives you a little bit mini background. You can learn about the documentary, our research, and all of that. So that's a good resource. And, one thing we're really pushing right now is that if any of your listeners are queer or trans people who went to a religious college, whether it's Liberty or another one, we really want to hear from them, because whether you're a current student or an alum, you can file a Title IX complaint with the Department of Education, or you can share your story with us, and we'd love to get that out there. So anyone who wants to do that, they can do that through our website, and we're really trying to make a push for some Title IX complaints to keep the pressure on.
Okay.
Is there any way for other listeners to help out? Do you have a fund set up or anything like that they can donate to?
Yeah, we've got a donate button on our website, and we're a fiscally sponsored project of the nonprofit Soul Force, and so any donations that you make are tax deductible. And we're a grassroots organization at this point, so any kind of funding would be greatly appreciated. And getting the word out to especially religious communities that are more progressive, that might be interested in helping us, that would be great.
Awesome. We'll link all that stuff. We'll tag the Instagram. We're going to do what we can to get the word out there to the people who are listening here. I think what you're doing is amazing. I'm glad it's going after. I've been learning a lot over the past, really even 6 months of just talking to different people about their experiences that I never would have even, I maybe guessed or thought about, that was probably tough. But really hearing from a lot of different people about what their experiences were directly with these religious institutions and the type of harm that they've done to them, whether or not they went to a Christian college or not, but just the religious institutions in general. It's been really eye-opening. So we're very happy to have you on and be able to get this get the word out there a little bit more.
Yeah.
For you guys.
Well, thank you for elevating those voices, and really happy you guys evolved on these issues, because not everyone does. So 2 straight white guys on the right side.
I'm ready to pat me on the back.
White guys. Yeah, right. It's hard to believe 2 straight white guys started another podcast, right?
But you're using the platform in a good way, so I really do appreciate that, because not a lot of people know about this Christian college world or fundamentalist Christianity in general. So we need as many people talking about it as we can. So it's real important.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it was great talking to you, Paul. It's nice to meet you. And for everybody listening, thanks for being here. If you're enjoying the show, leave a review on iTunes, and we will talk to you next time.